try and dissect that interview, I have two very special guests who are joining us. Kawal Sibal was a long-time colleague of Dr. Jaishankar in the Foreign Service, former Foreign Secretary, and I'm also joined by Victor Gao, the chair at the Soochow University. Kawal Sibal, let me start with you first. Of course, everybody's analyzed the whole joint statement, particularly on the Russia-Ukraine war. The justification or the defense from the External Affairs Minister, you heard him, basically saying or are addressing these concerns about dilution of language, not mentioning Russia directly, is two things. One, that look, every declaration is new and it has to reflect the current circumstances. So the Delhi declaration can't just copy-paste the lines from the Bali declaration when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, because the situation of the war itself has changed, number one. And number two, he's also, without naming those countries, has said that, you can't, on the one hand, say that this thing has affected all of us. It's one of the most important things, but I will not capture it in the joint statement. So I think he's addressing both sides, both concerns in the West about dilution of the language, including Ukraine, and concerns with Russia and China, saying, how can it not be captured? You have to have that in the joint statement. And they had 7 paragraphs of it in the joint statement.
Well, I think the External Affairs Minister has quite rightly pointed out the dynamism behind this compromised language on Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is that Russia had made it very clear that it would no longer accept the language that was included in the Bali Declaration. And China has been supportive of that position. The West all along, till the last minute, made it very clear that unless Russia is condemned and the language that they want is not included in the joint declaration, they will not allow a joint document to emerge. So it was a standoff. I think what then worked in favor of a compromise were a few things. One was, quite rightly, the host was India. The host was the Prime Minister of India. And I think there was a desire not to make this G20 under our presidency a failure, because it would have amounted to a failure if no joint declaration had been issued. And it would have affected, certainly in some ways, the dynamism of our ties with the West. And I think if President Biden was present on the spot, and they are the driving force behind this.
Yeah.
And if he stood firm that he will not budge unless he got the language he wanted, actually it meant really that he's not terribly concerned about how it might affect India's position, India's prestige, Prime Minister's personal prestige, as well as the impact on Indo-US relations. I think, therefore, he attached more importance to keeping India on the right side of the United States and the G7 at the cost of making some concessions on the Ukraine language. That is one. The Russians have also compromised in the sense that while Russia has not been mentioned by name at all, but there are indirect allusions to Russia. The many principles that have been put there, which the West can interpret as being directed against Russia. In fact, the Western line, as that of Jake Sullivan and President Macron, is that the West actually got what it wanted because it put into the text all that they wanted in terms of countries not violating the UN Charter or acquiring territories by force, and etc., etc. And the Russians went along so long as they were not targeted directly by name. That is second. Third, which is very important, I think, is that the West, the G7, wants the G20 to survive. They see that alternative platforms are emerging on the international scene, especially with the recent expansion of BRICS. And with a whole host of countries which are waiting in the line to join BRICS, and no Western country is present in the BRICS. And therefore, you have an alternative platform where the agenda is not dictated by the West, which doesn't have the priorities of the West.
Okay. We'll just try and fix that audio with Secretary Sibal in just a moment. But let me get Professor Victor Gao into this. I asked the Foreign Minister also about the decision by the Chinese president not to attend, which at that time was seen as a bit of a snub. But given what has been achieved over the 2 days that Delhi hosted this G20 summit and some really big deals, not just the joint statement, overcoming very serious differences on the Russia-Ukraine war, but also this big announcement of the corridor from India, the Middle East, going all the way to Western Europe, the biofuel alliance, adding the African Union, India walking the African Union chair to take his place at the G20 high table. These are all very, very big decisions that have been taken in that room where Xi Jinping chose not to be part of that room. So the signaling is from the entire G20, all the other 19 powers, is that if China does not want to be part of the room, if Xi Jinping does not want to be part of the room, that's his loss. The world is going to go ahead and make some of these pretty big deals.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, please allow me to congratulate once again on the successful G20 summit in New Delhi. And personally, I would like to thank and congratulate the Indian government and Prime Minister Modi, the foreign minister, and all the Indian friends for pulling this off. It's a wonderful summit and it deserves full recognition from all the countries involved. The third point is that China attaches great importance to G20 as well as the summit meeting in G20. China sent its premier, who is a member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, very, very important person, and mandated to take care of the economic affairs of China. And G20, unlike, let's say, the Security Council of the United Nations, does not have a mandate to focus on geopolitical issues. Its original mandate is to focus on economic and financial matters. And this falls squarely into the responsibility of the premier in China. Therefore, by sending the premier of China to attend the G20 summit in New Delhi, it doesn't constitute a stop. It constitutes a full recognition of the importance of G20 and how these important issues need to be dealt with. China opposes diversion of G20 into other issues, of course.
How does one explain then that for every G20 since Xi Jinping became president of China since 2013, he was the one who went? It was not the premier. This was the first time that he didn't come for a G20. It was the premier who went. How do you explain that?
Well, Mr. Li Qiang became the new premier in March 2023. He is very new in his job, and he has the full trust and confidence of General Secretary and President Xi Jinping. They get along very well as a pair, leading the country, leading the party, and leading the government. Therefore, I think it's very logical from the Chinese perspective. It's very logical, very natural for the Chinese premier to attend the New Delhi summit. It's not a snub. It's not less of a recognition. It is still a full recognition because what matters eventually is the substance. The substance is that China attaches great importance to a great neighboring country like India.
Okay.
China attaches great importance to the
Let me
New Delhi
bring
summit.
back Secretary Sibal back into this conversation. The other big thing, and people, are not quite, maybe they understand the magnitude of it, but the impact it will have, this economic corridor between India, the Middle East, and all the way to Europe, backed by the United States. And I asked External Affairs Minister Jaishankar this, is this a reply or a match to the BRI? And he said it stands on its own. He doesn't believe in comparing projects such as these. And I also asked him about the financing because China has run into trouble when it comes to sustainability of its projects. Many smaller countries have found it difficult to service the debt that was incurred because of these massive infrastructure projects and have been worse off for it. And the answer to that, again, was look at the countries involved: Saudi Arabia, UAE, France, Germany, Italy, India, the United States. The question of debt serviceability or the lack of ability to service debt does not arise because these are some of the biggest countries in the world economically. Does that convince you, Kawal Sibal, that this is going to be more, not just more sustainable, but going to give the signal to smaller countries that this is a more sustainable way of developing infrastructure than the Belt and Road?
Well, I'd like to say a couple of things. One, that we should not look upon the connectivity projects that we are involved in as some kind of rival projects to the BRI. After all, the International South international north-south corridor through Iran to Russia predates the BRI by about 10 years. And this particular project actually is being developed because of the very intensive ties India has developed with the Gulf monarchies, with the UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular. These two countries in particular. These two countries have very major programs of development by 2030. If you look at the vision document of 2030, you will see how much investment they're going to make in new cities, in infrastructure. In fact, Saudi Arabia wants to develop the new Naim or someplace they're developing as some kind of a rival to Singapore. Now, in addition to that, there is the whole issue of food security, where we've been discussing with these countries how a food corridor can be created between India and these countries. Defense ties between India and these countries, because of concerns about security in the Indian Ocean and the West, and the Arabian Sea touches both India's coast and these countries. That defense element also is becoming important, and they want to invest in India's defense manufacturing as part of Atmanirbharta in order to reduce their dependence on the West, if you like.
Okay.
So these are the motivating factors. Now, on top of that, you have the ITU2 with Israel becoming partner, and the UAE and Israel normalizing relationship. So the Israeli element is an addition. So when you talk about Europe, it means that the corridor will go through Middle East, on to Jordan, Haifa, and then on to Europe. I think the connectivity in this region serves India's needs, serves the needs of these countries, and so far as Europe is concerned, I don't think it has that much stake in this project, frankly, but it will benefit because of India as a rising economy, India becoming more active, FTAs being signed with the European Union. Therefore, trade, investment, and all these things will benefit from this corridor. So it meets the interests of everybody, all sides. And the United States may certainly have in mind that this is a kind of a competitive project to the BRI. It gives an alternative route to India and these countries in the Middle East, which have very good relations and very close relations with China, to also have trade corridors which go into Europe.
Okay, so let me give the final word to Professor Gao. Again, no one wants to compare one to the other, but I think the comparisons are quite obvious. And two, the Belt and Road is Xi Jinping's signature initiative. Over 100 countries are part of it. But a large number of countries in Asia, in Africa, are simply being buried under the weight of the debt incurred because of some of these massive infrastructure projects. I mean, in the case of Sri Lanka, the case of Namibia. When those countries, those smaller countries, look at this big corridor and the big countries that are backing this, from the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, India, when they see the big countries that are backing this project, isn't the signal that's going out to them that, look, maybe it's better to invest our time and energy and resources here because at least it's backed by some of the biggest countries, not just by China, and we won't get crushed under the weight of Chinese debt?
First of all, talking about the corridor, I personally congratulate the launch of this corridor, and I hope it will be a success, and assume it is a connectivity project. Then the more the better, because the more roads you build, the more connectivity projects you build, and they interact with each other, they reinforce each other. So by the end of the day, if BRI projects and corridor projects interact, hopefully they will reinforce each other. Secondly, I do hope India will beef up its own internal domestic connectivity projects at the same time, because otherwise it's unthinkable that you can participate in building a very brand new railway connectivity projects for other countries where you still need to do a lot of homework at home. Now, for the United States, the last time they built the railways, it was at the end of the 19th century. So how much they can contribute is very doubtful. Now, the other thing is that I would urge India and Pakistan to improve their relations, because you cannot get across from Pakistan to get further west onto the other parts according to the plan of this corridor. Now, talking about BRI, more than 100 countries participate. If you look at Indonesia, they just celebrated the successful launch of the Bandung-Jakarta high-speed railway. If you go to Laos, that high-speed railway is operating to the satisfaction of everyone. If you go to Ethiopia, they have brand new highways, etc., reaching the coast. And then you talk about Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest supplier of crude oil to China. The only high-speed railway which runs in Saudi Arabia was done by the Chinese companies, and I think it creates a lot of miracles.
I just want to add,
so when we talk about
30 seconds
to
the Pakistan point. I'm completely out of time. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but it's a curtailed debate today. Just on the Pakistan point, the reason why India is having to build all these connectivity projects, whether it's North-South or now this one, is because Pakistan doesn't give you overland rights. They have that sort of control. They don't give you overland rights. That's why India, 20 years ago, thought of the North-South corridor project. And reality is that hasn't taken off because of geopolitical reasons, perhaps even execution reasons. That's why they're looking at this project, this economic corridor, as a viable alternative. Thank you very much to both our guests.